Welcome, everyone. I'm Emmeline Nathans, ASBA's Programs and Operations Coordinator, and I'm joined by Executive Director Jody Williams and our Exhibitions Director, Carol Wooden. We are pleased you could join us today for our program, Botanical Art Worldwide, Guidance for Artists. We hope this program will give you insight into this worldwide project and its crop diversity theme. If you have any questions during the session, please type them into the Q&A and we'll have Carol or Jody answer them at the end of the program. Those who registered will receive a recording link within 24 hours and this session will be available in a week. Now, Jody Williams will begin by sharing more about the overall project.
Thank you, Emmeline, and welcome everyone. So glad that you joined us to hear a little bit about this exciting project. Okay, Botanical Art Worldwide 2025. So to give a little background, in 2018, we mounted the first Botanical Art Worldwide project. 25 countries participated and hosted exhibitions around the world with the theme of native plants. It was highly successful. It was also highly exhausting for most of the countries who organized this project. So it took us a little while to recover, but now our steering committee, which consists of one delegate from each country, is now able to meet by Zoom, which is much easier than when we planned for 2018 and we were limited to the ASBA conferences and those international members who attended those. So now we can call meetings and discuss plans with the whole group on Zoom. And we've decided to plan for another Botanical Art Worldwide project for 2025 and to also celebrate the Worldwide Day of Botanical Art on May 18th of 2025. Okay. The Worldwide Steering Committee votes on all policies, and each country, some of those policies are that each country would host an exhibition. It could be either virtual or physical, and that there would be one exhibition per country. The selected theme this year is crop diversity, and we've also had this nice logo designed and selected by the committee to use in all of our communications. So to distinguish, Botanical Art Worldwide 2025 refers to the overall project, the simultaneous exhibitions around the world, and a slideshow of all exhibitions, artwork that will be shown at every venue and also available to view online. The Worldwide Day of Botanical Art refers to the specific date of May 18th, 2025, which will be a celebration where we can broadcast our events on social media, and all the exhibitions will be open on this day. Here's a list of the countries who have expressed their intent to participate in Botanical Art Worldwide 2025. You can see great representation across the globe in all 6 continents except Antarctica. And we're really thrilled with some newcomers this year: Bulgaria, Ecuador, India, the Philippines, Taiwan, Turkey, and Singapore. So that's a very exciting to welcome those new countries. So each country forms its own project committee. It could be a botanical art society or an organizing committee or a collaboration between multiple groups and institutions. The country's organizing committee organizes its own exhibition, whether it's a virtual exhibition or at a physical venue. They create their own call for entries, select their own jurors, give their exhibition a name and establish opening and closing dates for their exhibition, which can be flexible. Each country can have their exhibition open for whatever period of time they wish, and many will have travel schedules where they will subsequently visit other venues. The slideshow of, they'll also provide a slideshow of their country's exhibition artwork, which will contribute to the overall global slideshow. And they also determine the eligibility of artists for their own country's exhibition. Okay. With respect to eligibility of artists, it is up to each country. The intent of the project is that each country's exhibition consists of artwork by artists resident in that country. Two or more smaller contiguous countries may join to do a single exhibition. Artists living in a country not participating in Botanical Art Worldwide may enter a nearby country's exhibition at the discretion of the organizing committee in that country. Our hope is that the project will be a catalyst for artists to join together and form an organization to put on an exhibition in their own country. This is what happened in Indonesia in 2018, as they founded the Indonesian Society of Botanical Art, which is now very active and hosted their exhibition in Botanical Art Worldwide 2018 and will be again participating in 2025. The U.S. exhibition, A More Abundant Future, will be hosted by the Foundry Arts Center in St. Charles, Missouri, which is very close to the St. Louis airport. The submission deadline for the U.S. exhibition is October 4th, and the exhibition will run from April 4th to May 29th with a celebration on the Worldwide Day of Botanical Art. Official information is available on the Botanical Art Worldwide website, botanicalartworldwide.info. It has information about the project, an explanation of the crop diversity theme, which Carol will go into more detail about, lists the participating countries, the exhibition venues, opening and closing dates of exhibitions, and also has history on what took place in 2018. So countries are constantly adding content to this. There are some countries that have not yet provided content, but we're certainly encouraging them to do so as soon as possible so that that reference is complete. So check back often if you don't see what you're looking for now. It should be coming online in the next few months. If you have questions about the project, you can send an email to worldwide@asba-art.org, and I monitor and respond to questions that are sent there. So that's all I have, and I'd like to turn it over to Carol Wooden, who will go into more detail about the crop diversity theme that we've chosen for Botanical Art Worldwide 2025.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here today too, and to be able to speak to all of you via the magic of Zoom. Time has flown by, and we only have about 10 months until the Worldwide Day of Botanical Art occurs around the world on May 18th. Most of the exhibitions will open before that, and as Jody mentioned, our deadline is October 4th. So as crops are coming in now, this is really our last opportunity to get some really good subjects. I'll talk about the categories of acceptable plants as they've been defined and agreed upon by the 30+ participating countries thus far joining in the project. By the end of the slideshow, you should have a better idea of what kinds of things you'd like to work on. And if you have any questions, as we mentioned previously, just go ahead and ask ask them and we'll answer them as we can at the end of the talk. A little background about crop diversity first, why it's important and why this theme now. One of the main things botanical artists do outside of painting and drawing interesting plants is try to raise awareness of the many issues around plant diversity of all kinds, from wild species to plants such as these that have accompanied humankind on their journey of life for over thousands of years, nourishing us along the way. We're deciding every day whether to retain a diverse genome for food that's resilient, flavorful, and nutritious, like this Jimmy Nardello pepper, painted by Janine Walkie, or to continue to move toward food that resembles a manufactured product. This topic is one of the most important challenges facing us into the future. The more uniform our plants become, the more genetic erosion occurs. The same system that allows you to walk into the grocery store and find that same red or green pepper that you're used to seeing everywhere are at the same time causing a loss of the diversity that's central to that crop remaining healthy and robust. Janine found her subject at a local farmer's market. And this is a graphic Colin Curry used in a talk we hosted a couple years ago with crop scientists and still have on our YouTube channel. It's a wonderful representation of food exchange around the world, from its origin region to every other region. No matter where you live in the world, chances are about 70% of the foods you eat originally came from outside of the country you live in. This is true even if you live in a country with high indigenous crop diversity. And this rate is increasing as we look into the future and food systems become increasingly globalized. But if we look back in time, we see that every crop plant we have has taken a journey from where it originated as a wild plant, and as it traveled over time and through space, it's been changed many, many times along the way. So you can think of Botanical Art Worldwide as a visual mapping of crop diversity around the world. I've learned so much by investigating this topic over the last few years, but there's always more to learn. One thing is clear, that is that food plants make it to every corner of the earth. As I was preparing to give a previous slideshow to botanical artists in New Zealand, I happened upon the website for Heritage Food Crops Research Trust, New Zealand, and took a look at some of the bean varieties they're promoting. I found this corn planter, purple bean, and this text, an heirloom from the Seneca Indians. I was rather stunned because I grew up on the Seneca Indian Reservation in Western New York. And as children, we learned about the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, which were all grown together by the indigenous people. So some of these beans from the small reservation of 8,500 souls in my corner of the world are working their magic on the other side of the world in New Zealand. And you can see what great subjects beans of all kinds make by looking at this colored pencil drawing of what appears to be closely related black turtle beans by Canadian artist Crystal Dreiger. I like to use the apple as a template to understand more about any of the foods we cultivate and eat. Like nearly all the crops we eat, the cultivated apple, Malus domestica, originated with wild apples, moved around the world, and has been changed everywhere it's gone, resulting in about 7,500 cultivars. Apples have a common ancestry of a wild apple, Malus sieversii, that originated in Central Asia in Kazakhstan, about where the star is, and traveled the Silk Road and moved through the Middle East, Europe, and Asia. It picked up some genetics from the European crabapple, moved into Africa, across the oceans with the age of exploration, and is now grown on every continent but Antarctica. Out of those 7,500 varieties, though, only a few dozen are grown commercially. And this is a humble example of a living plant preserver. One of my local farm markets with some apple cultivars that have storied genealogies. This is where the story of apple history meets artists like us. No matter where you live, there's some kind of fruit that has a deep local history. As far as apples go, different varieties may be grown in China than in South Africa and India, Australia, and Europe, or the Americas, but many times are the same cultivars being grown everywhere around the world. At the same time, new cultivars are being created, older ones are being lost. Hanging on to this diversity is critical, and it is only achieved by actually growing these varieties or saving their genetic material in the form of seeds or other germplasm. In addition to new cultivars being created intentionally, cultivated apple varieties and their progeny can hybridize with wild relatives like this northeastern wild crab apple, Malus coronaria. These naturalized apples are called feral, and they can be varieties that have been all but lost or varieties that are a result of cross-pollination between cultivated varieties and wild species. This interchange can happen with any cultivated crop. It can naturalize in surrounding landscapes, and it can also trade genetic material, creeping into the wild crop-related genome. Focused attention is being paid to these unintentional hybridizations, and scientists are studying the rich diversity they represent. We humans and all our billions rely upon crops that are solid producers and that can adapt to varied conditions and locations and nourish us, like this Granny Smith apple. It's a heritage apple, as it originated in Australia in 1868. A seedling Maria Ann Smith decided to cultivate. It has taken its place as the world's most popular green apple. And why is that? Some of the characteristics are its long storage time, its tart flavor, it's crisp, it's suitable for both eating and for cooking, and it has a solid green color. It travels well, it doesn't bruise easily. It's considered an heirloom apple as it's been around for over 150 years. However, it has become the standard tart green apple, supplanting many other regional varieties of tart green apple. So although it technically meets the age rule for a heritage plant, it might not be the best subject for this project. Alternatively, this painting by Denise Wasser-Kolar shows the Roxbury russet, which is believed to be the oldest cultivar bred in the US from the mid-17th century. Even though this apple keeps well too, it's more of a cider apple, and it's considered undesirable as a mass market apple because of the russeting on the skin. Denise found her subject at Badger Set Research Farm in Minnesota. An apple like this is ideal for the exhibition. So now, with just a tiny little glimpse into what is an extremely complicated history of the apple, one can begin to appreciate the history of all the foods we eat through the lens of its evolution from a wild plant, then through hundreds and sometimes thousands of years of travel and alterations that sometimes occur naturally, but most often are guided by human hands. So why conserve diversity? Lots of things can contribute to a crisis in food crops. Societal level upheavals and strife, environmental changes and weather vagaries, insect and critter pests, diseases. Ensuring food security requires more than one simple action. However, this painting of Lizzie Sanders distills what genetic diversity can do for the foods we rely on. On the left is Solanum tuberosum, the common potato. On the right is a crop wild relative from Mexico, Solanum demissum. In the middle is a potato created when the two are crossed, Solanum x edinense. During the long history of that wild species in Mexico, it gained natural resistance to the blight that affects potatoes and carries that in its genome. It then passes it on to those potatoes it's hybridized with. Lizzie sourced her material from a project at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh to recreate the Edinburgh potato, to examine just how Solanum demissum imparts blight resistance. They found that the resistance varies, but it is believed to have helped relieve the blight at the end of the 19th century. When the Edinburgh potato is crossed again with the cultivated potato, it continues to bring along that resistance. So this is a beautifully artistic, but also informative depiction of the value of crop wild relatives and crop genetic diversity. Potatoes are the 4th largest food crop in the world, and there are over 180 species of potatoes. So now that we've got that under our belt, I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the categories of acceptable plants as they've been defined and agreed upon by the countries thus far joining in the project. I'll talk a little bit about heritage crop wild relatives, and ancient crops. And I will admit the first caveat is that I'm not a scientist, but I've learned a few things over the last several years that I've been painting these kind of plants and through our exhibitions program. However, there is always more to learn. I would say that if you have a question about a particular plant you're interested in and don't know if it qualifies, you can ask us, but we'll try to figure it out. But there will be plants we're not familiar with. And as Jody mentioned, each country is the final arbiter of what's included in its own exhibition. I'm going to provide examples of plants in each category agreed upon, mainly using artworks from our Abundant Future exhibition that traveled around the country and closed at its last venue last year. The Worldwide project is similarly themed with a few little tweaks. If you want to look at some of the artworks in ASBA's show and read the interesting stories behind the artworks, you can find them on our website. So the first category for the Worldwide exhibition is heritage or heirloom crops, which we define as cultivated over 50 years, but not industrially produced. This is the major category of plants that we're interested in terms of food security, sustainability, climate change, and other issues facing us in the year ahead. It will most likely be the largest group of artworks in the cumulative Worldwide project. These will be found in grocery stores, farm stands, local farms and orchards, at botanical or research gardens, or grown by artists in their own gardens. For this project, it doesn't matter where the plant originated, as long as it's grown in your country now. And this is an example of just a small amount of the genus Cucurbita, whose natural range is in the Americas, but has made its way into every corner of the earth. The variety on the left is in colored pencil by American artist Tammy McEntee. It's a very large and tough squash with a blue cast to the exterior. Hubbard squash is very hard to cut. So the fact that Tammy managed to cut this down the middle and reveal that rich interior says she was really committed to bringing that to the viewer. It's believed to have been hybridized in the Caribbean islands and brought to New Zealand in the early 19th century. In the center is Damodar Gurjar's pumpkin painted in tempera. Damodar is from a long line of farmers in India where he found this pumpkin. The squash is now a staple crop in India, and India is second only to China in production of squash, producing over 4 million metric tons per year. And on the right is Akiko Inokido's Shishigatani Kaboka pumpkin, cultivated in the same form for over 200 years. The city of Kyoto supports the protection of traditional vegetables and pays farmers to grow these from seed. They are then a part of a pumpkin memorial service every July at the Anrakuji Temple that has continued for 200 years. As artists, we can all see how varied just these 3 cucurbits are visually. What we can't see, though, is how each of them contains genetic resources that may be common, uncommon, or unique. So a cucurbit grown on one continent for many years may have different genetics than one that has been traveling the world or one that's growing in its native range. Another example of heritage crops are these 2 paintings of maize. Seneca red stalker corn, painted by Albina Heron on the right, and my own Oaxacan green corn. The red corn originates in the Finger Lakes region of New York State, again with the Seneca Nation, in the late 1800s, and is a sweet corn. The green corn is a dent corn originating in Mexico, and that's a type of corn that's ground into cornmeal and used in tortillas and chips. Of course, maize itself originated in southern Mexico about 10,000 years ago, hybridized by indigenous people from a grass-like plant called teosinte. In the thousands of years since, it's changed and moved through the world and has become integral to the cuisines of many nations worldwide. It is poised to become the world's most widely cultivated and traded crop over the next few years. It's used in animal food, biofuel, and many other industrial uses along with human food. What has happened over time is that fewer and fewer varieties are being cultivated on a broader scale, most of it yellow corn. So genetic erosion is taking place and those mass-produced varieties become more susceptible to diseases and pests. More pests and diseases lead to higher use of pesticides and herbicides, etc. So many benefits are derived from keeping the diversity in major crops like maize. And you can see they're fun to paint too. I grew the green corn in my own garden, and Albina got her corn from a farmer in Alfred, New York. And this is a heritage gooseberry that Linda Powers found at a local organic fruit farm in Minnesota. This gooseberry can be traced to the state of Utah in 1888, where it was cultivated by W. Craighead. She's captured the spring flowers, ripening, and fully ripe berries in this lovely painting. And this is an example of heritage crops and incidentally, a crop wild relative. Jean Emmons painted this colorful and varied collection of eggplant cultivars hybridized on different continents. But she was working on the painting and she felt that it needed some orange. So she started to look for an orange eggplant. And so by seeking and finding this small orange eggplant species, she's not only added orange to her composition, but added a wild eggplant species, Solanum ethiopicum, from Africa, to a group that most likely originated in Asia. The cultivars of all these eggplants show the diversity partially created by the human hand over many years in color, size, and no doubt flavor. And Jean found these specimens at local farms and markets, and some she grew herself. And that leads us very comfortably right into crop wild relatives. So crop wild relatives are wild species that can be hybridized with cultivated crops to impart a new characteristic to the cultivated crop. This category includes such wild species as plums, berries, bananas, sunflowers, grains, beans, rice, figs, and many, many others. A research paper edited by Sir Peter Crane and authored by Colin Curry et al. Studied the status of U.S. crop wild relatives in depth and found that the vast majority of them required urgent conservation action. Drawing attention to these wild plants is an important part of this project. A good example of a crop wild relative is this little sunflower found in the Mountain West that's quite tolerant of dry conditions and could be hybridized and with cultivated sunflowers, which produce important food worldwide to help make them more drought tolerant. This study identified 600 U.S. wild relatives of important agricultural crops, 1/3 of which may be endangered in the wild. And they require both in situ protection as well as ex situ protection. Although this particular study that I read applied to plants in the US, the same numbers apply worldwide. If you're looking for a particular crop wild relative, no matter where you live in the world, you can get on iNaturalist and see where it has been spotted and when. Then you can go there and study it in the field if you're able. Often they're also cultivated in botanical gardens and found in public reserves as well. And I'll include the link to that study on the final page of this talk. It's a great resource for finding a lot of information about crop wild relatives. So as a first example of a crop wild relative, I thought I would show this North American grape species painted by Betsy Rogers Knox because it has a specific history with really the whole world in wine grape cultivation. This grape species, along with several other North American species, were transported to Europe in the 1800s, bringing along with them the phylloxera root aphid to European origin grapevines. This worldwide interchange caused devastating losses to the European vines as they had no resistance to the aphid. countries everywhere were trying to find a solution. Although this grape was somewhat resistant to the pest, other North American species were more so, and now grapes around the world are grafted onto North American Vitis species rootstock, including this one, but mainly other wild species. So they were both the cause of the problem and the cure for the problem. Wild plums are another good example of crop wild relatives. They're wild plant species in the same genus as our cultivated plums, and they are many times also foraged for food, like Prunus americana on the left by Jane Hancock and Prunus spinosa, or blackthorn on the right by Liz Shipham. These both have the potential of being crossed with cultivated Prunus crops to impart a new characteristic to the crop, whether it be flavor related, disease resistance, habitat tolerance, or something else. Prunus is an important genus for edible foods. Plums, peaches, apricots, and almonds are also Prunus species. Both of these artists source their subjects in locations in the wild where they live. Crop wild relatives also include foraged wild plants, and this beautiful painting by Denise Ramsey of the endemic New Zealand fuchsia fits that category. It is the largest fuchsia in the world, and its sweet fruit was foraged by the Maori and is now also eaten by those who've come after. Its populations have suffered from a number of threats, chiefly among them introduced common brush-tail possums. Denise has shown both flowers and fruits in her painting, and this was created for the first worldwide Botanical Art Worldwide project in 2018. And here's another example of crop wild relatives that are foraged. Gillian Condi in South Africa made this beautiful and informative painting of 4 foraged wild relatives of melons and cucumbers that are native to the Kalahari Desert. We'll focus on the Sama melon, the stripy melon in the background. They have a high water content. They're over 90% water and were opened and eaten for water by the San people on treks through the arid southern regions of southern Africa. Sama melon is not sweet, but these have been both foraged and cultivated in Africa for thousands of years. This melon is in the same genus as the watermelon we find in the supermarket, Citrullus, and has been used in recent experiments, hybridizing it with that cultivated watermelon, and it made the watermelon more resistant to pests such as whiteflies. So this painting qualifies as they both are actually crop wild relatives that were foraged and also qualify as ancient crops because they were cultivated as well. The third category is ancient crops, and those are the ones that have been cultivated in the same form for hundreds or thousands of years. For example, some varieties of sweet potatoes, farro wheat, barley, cowpeas, rice, taro, and nuts. This category includes foods cultivated, gathered, and selected by indigenous people around the world. In this painting, Susan Minton decided to focus on wheat, one of the world's most important food crops, and chose this emmer wheat, sometimes called farro, and grew it herself. She had to grow it in several locations to get one of those locations to produce, and luckily it produced many plants. In domesticated emmer wheat, the seed head, when ripe, remains intact, and that allows it to be harvested. And this was a key step in the domestication of wheat. Evidence of domestication of emmer wheat shows up about 10,000 years ago in the Fertile Crescent. So I would call this an ancient crop. Until fairly recently, it had been grown only on a very small range, but it has regained popularity and is now grown by specialist growers in many different regions. Sally Petru did this painting of sorghum, a versatile and drought-tolerant crop indigenous to Africa. Sorghum is a good staple food, especially in drought-prone areas. It's a lot more secure food source than corn. Sorghum is believed to have been domesticated in Ethiopia and Sudan maybe 5,000 years ago, and what I find most remarkable about it is how variable it is. There are grain sorghums, forage sorghums, sweet sorghums for molasses or syrup, and it's also being grown for bioenergy. And of course, some of the sorghum is turned into brooms. And lastly, another category that the steering committee agreed to accept is heritage utilitarian crops. The same criteria apply to these crops. They have to be over 50 years old, not produced on an industrial scale. This cotton species, painted by Susan Tomlinson, is a perfect example of this. Commonly called the Levant cotton, it's a short staple-length cotton native to Northern Africa, Asia Minor, and India. Over 90% of the world's cotton is a New World cotton, Gossypium hirsutum, a species from the Americas centering on Mexico. This species shown here is responsible for less than 1% of the world's crop of cotton. Susan found her plant and the other cotton she's been documenting at the greenhouses where she teaches at Texas Tech University in Lubbock, Texas, where they're researching the genetics of Gossypium. So that is a tiny little bit of background and a word of encouragement to each of you to think about what you'd like to paint for the project or draw, and what story you'd like to tell through that artwork. These screenshots are from a talk presented at our virtual conference a few years ago, and it's filled with great information from 4 different scientists. You can find it on our YouTube channel at Botanical Art by ASBA. I love this presentation. I've watched it several times. And then I'm going to leave this screen up for a few minutes so you can take a screenshot or a photograph in case you need any of these links. You can find information through these resources or by being in contact with your country's organizing committee. The World Crop Trust is a great resource, and the article I mentioned earlier is at the bottom of this list. So I want to thank all of you for attending, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Carol. Yes, please send in your questions in the Q&A. Jody and Carol are your experts today, and they will try to answer it for you. We have one question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jody.
I was going to say, while we wait for some questions to come in, a factoid that I often use when talking about this project is out of 20,000 edible plants and 6,000 that have historically been used as food, fewer than 200 now make a major contribution to food production, and just 9 account for 2/3 of food production. So that gives, in a nutshell, why crop diversity is important.
Thank you. As Carol and Jody mentioned, you can send any additional ones to the worldwide at asba-art.org or directly to Carol at exhibitions@asba-art.org. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Carol and Jody, for doing such a wonderful job trying to give us insight into this incredible project that you're organizing and help us as we select our subjects to submit in the US this October, and depending on which country you're submitting to around the world. So thank you all for attending. We hope you found the program helpful. There will be a brief survey when the session ends, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. And on August 22nd, join us for the Botanical Artist Live with Sue Wickison as we take a closer look at the story, The Elegance of Detail, Including the Bits, published in the June 2024 journal on page 22. In this artist talk, Sue will provide insight into her award-winning collection, Plants of the Quran. A keen observer, Sue will share the importance of including dissection work to impart both knowledge and visual interest. You can register for this program at asba-art.org. And please stay tuned for future programming on our website and in our monthly highlights newsletter. Thank you all again. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Jody. All who registered will receive a link to this recording within 24 hours, and it will be available to view for 1 week. Thank you, everyone. Take care.